according to flood IQ data about the Tampa Bay area, sea level rise plus a hurricane category 3 would cause flooding related damage to 40,359 homes in this area. What can we do to protect these areas? And it doesn't matter where we start. Why don't we start with Olivia, and then you get the first shot going back.
Can you hear me? Is the mic on?
Is that on? I don't hear it.
I don't hear me.
That's the other one. Here's the mute button.
Why don't you take this one and I'll figure out what's going on. Okay.
Okay, there we go, that's better. Okay, so in order to protect the areas, New Jersey has actually started an interesting program of retreat a little bit, but they realized that we can't fight nature. We have tried this for a number of years where we thought we could conquer water, and it's just not feasible to do so. The barrier islands exist for a reason, and we need to let them exist, to reclaim those, or let nature reclaim those, let the mangroves reclaim those, because those really protect the inland beaches from erosion and houses from erosion and protect the areas inland. So what New Jersey has done has created a buyback program. So houses that are destroyed, if people prefer, the state will actually buy back those houses, let them rebuild somewhere else, and let nature kind of reclaim those areas. So particularly the barrier islands, we can let the mangroves grow back, other native species, which will protect the areas inland from the waves and other effects, wind damage from the storm, and will protect some of the areas inland from the damage from winds and waves and that kind of effect, and save lives and protect buildings. So.
Thank you. We've got a couple little housekeeping things. I believe Jason Miller just arrived. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why don't you come on up? You're on the line here. And that was Olivia Babis. I wanted to repeat that because I don't know if I said you were from State Senate 23. So Tony Mowry, let's give him a chance to sit down. Why don't you answer that question? Do you need to repeat it, Tony?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, great.
Okay. My name is Tony Mowry. I'm running for District 74, which is down in South County in Venice. And the first thing I think that makes the most sense is comes directly from that video is investing in our infrastructure. Every dollar, as it said, we invest today saves $7 in remediation costs down the road. So that's the first thing, shoring up bridges, making sure that our down in Venice, they are redoing some of the sewer systems to deal with the flooding issue. But I think probably the most important thing is to stop that arc of climate change. As I think Jan said, as the sea levels rise, it makes more storms, which makes the sea level rise, which makes more storms. And so addressing the underlying issue of climate change through smart policy and encouraging weaning us off of fossil fuels and changing those kind of policies are probably the most important thing we can do right now, and we have to start now because if we don't start now, those are going to get exponentially worse. So I would say shore up the infrastructure for sure, but address the underlying issue.
Why don't we go back to Jason? Just introduce yourself, tell us what you're running for, and then we'll get back on track.
Certainly. Hello, everybody. Good evening, and thank you for coming out. Just quickly, I was just coming from a different event, so I was hustling over. Thanks very much for having us tonight. My name is Jason Miller, and I'm running for State House 72, which is the district in which we're in. It's University Parkway down to Osprey, and I'm running to give a voice to my hometown, which is here in Tallahassee.
Now, the question was, according to Flood IQ, which is an interest in this, has an interest in this area, data from that group says Tampa Bay would see, with a Category 3 hurricane plus sea level rise, flooding related damage to 40,359 homes in the area. What can we do now to address that problem, protect these areas?
I would agree with Tony on that. It would be infrastructure is what we can do locally. It does seem like an issue that is more national, even international in some ways. So there should be some policies about that that could be implemented. But locally, it would be infrastructure. We see Miami that's getting encroached with seawater now. We're probably not far behind that. So infrastructure changes. I'm also in the military. It's also a security risk for people in drought-ridden areas of the world, for migration purposes, and crime and international issues that are associated with that are also associated with climate change. So there's a short-term goal and a long-term goal, but the local impact, I think, would be clearly infrastructure changes.
Okay, Tracy Pratt, why don't we hear from you?
Good evening. My name is Tracy Pratt. I'm running for state representative in House District 71, which is northwest Sarasota and western Manatee County. So my district runs right along the coast and includes Anna Maria Island and Longboat Key. So very fragile and vulnerable environment. And if you take a look at my platform, you'll see that I have a lot of really good and important issues, but number one is the environment. Because if we cannot protect the environment, then nothing else is going to matter. We are going to have security issues. We're going to have, food loss. It's going to cause all kinds of problems. And I went to law school in New Orleans, and I lived there for 10 years on either side of Katrina. And I coordinated services, low-income legal aid services after the BP oil spill. And I really saw how devastating it can be to a community and the changes in the fabric of the community, even now many years out. And people are still struggling with that. So I agree with everybody. We need some serious changes to our infrastructure, and we need to be focused also in our universities for research to address climate change issues. And we're looking at having to build sidewalks higher, having to build houses higher, and I've just been given my 10-second thing. So thank you very much.
Great, Pilon.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks for the invitation. I just want on a personal note, Keith Fitzgerald, and we are actually pretty good friends, has waited 6 years, longer than that, 6 years to get me to be able to ask me questions. So, I love it, Keith. I'm Ray Pilon. I'm a candidate for the District 72 House on the Republican side, and as a Republican, I'm not afraid to say climate change. We know what's happening. From the question itself, I'd like to go back a little bit in history. First of all, we have done a lot in Sarasota County. Although the celery fields need to be enhanced, they prevented an enormous amount of flooding from the 100-year floods. When I first came here, the whole town flooded west of 75, and 75 wasn't even there, because I've been here for 44 years. In the legislature, I served on, one of my key issues was serving on the Agricultural Natural Resources, both the Appropriations Committee and the Policy Committee. A lot of that policy failed, and I think we need to continue it. We need the city of Sarasota to step to the plate. Their infrastructure is in dire need.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And we have limited time for this group. Brevity is appreciated, and I think you're doing that. That's great. So we'll go now from Ray, Tracy, Jason, I'm sorry, Tony, Jason, and Olivia. I was trying to read the cards instead of looking at your face for some reason. I'm not. So here's the question. What role, and we'll start with Ray and just go back and forth this way. What role should the state education system play in education on sea level rise? Is there an education program that you would champion?
Well, that's a great question, because I don't think that our university systems or our college systems have taken this on with the fervor that they should. They're sometimes too interested in some of the more technical things, but if you look at just the engineering side of this issue, we have a lack of engineers in the state of Florida. What a great place to interject this type of curriculum and give them the chance to create these solutions in the future. So I think it needs to be drastically responded.
Tracy.
Like I mentioned in my last answer, I think we need to be putting resources into our state universities to study and research climate change, and as well as what Ray said as far as structural issues go. But I think we also need to be focused on addressing climate change at a lower level when people are young. Right now, we see a generation of people who are climate science deniers. And I have a hard time, reconciling how people can look at fact and say, no, that's just not happening. So I think we need to work with education early on, and we need to be putting resources into our university systems to study this and come up with best practices.
Yeah, I agree with Tracy. I'll make my answer brief, though. Everybody knows the name Marjorie Stoneman Douglas from the high school, but in my opinion, her classic novel, River of Grass, should be required reading in Florida schools to understand the Everglades completely and understand how we have altered the Everglades and caused a lot of the problems that we see today. So requiring that kind of education and Florida-specific education on the specific issues that face this state. In that book, she says there's no other Everglades in the world, which is true. And so understanding Florida, I think, is important.
Jason?
Certainly. I agree with a lot of that, but I just want to add something that it has to go further than just education. This isn't a surprise to people who have scientific backgrounds. It's not a surprise that climate change is real, and now 30 years later, after I was in elementary school and they were saying these exact same things, that now the things are actually happening. So this is an opportunity this is my first time running, in part because I want to have a fresh face in District 72, a fresh face representing my hometown of Tallahassee, with a voice that can actually act. I was a lifeguard on Siesta Key, so I firsthand know the beauty and the disgust of red tide, the beauty of the beach and the disgust of red tide. So not only will I be a good advocate, but it'll be a personal mission for me as well.
Olivia?
Yeah, I was wondering why we're talking about starting at the university level. I mean, I grew up in Florida, and I remember going on field trips in elementary school to, farms, and now you ask a child where their food comes from, and they'll say the grocery store. They don't get that connection. So I think it's important to reestablish that connection to nature and understand the processes. And really, kids are smart, and they get things that you don't think that they get sometimes. So they can really, I think our next generations come up with solutions that we just can't fathom yet. And sometimes it really is the old Adam and kiss, like keep it simple. And I think that we can come up with just creativity that we haven't grasped yet because we're thinking more complex maybe than we need to. But sometimes it really is, we think of restoring ecology as defeat, and maybe that's not such a terrible thing.
How wicked would it be?
Yes. The dreaded bell. So I think I'll interject a question from the audience here, because we have a good one. What would you do to prevent Lake Okeechobee from polluting the surrounding environment when water is released? Olivia, you go first.
My turn. Okay, so Lake Okeechobee, this is a problem. It's going to continue to be a problem. There are enough nutrients in Lake Okeechobee that if all the dumping, if all the back pumping, everything were to stop right now, that there are enough nutrients for it to keep causing red tide for the next 50 years. And even with repairing the dikes, which needs to be done, we're going to have to release water from the lake. This is Florida. We have rainy seasons, we have hurricanes. That's not going to stop. We definitely need to create other solutions for where to put the water, but we're going to have to pump water out of it. So that water originally ran south. That was the direction it was meant to flow, and that's the direction it needs to flow. We need to buy the sugarlands south of the lake. We need to filter that water through water treatment plants, and it needs to filter through the marshes the way it was intended to go, and go back through the Everglades and provide fresh water.
Tony, go ahead.
Jason. I agree with a lot of what Olivia said. Specifically, to add to that, however, there should be some reasonable regulations to basically stop the polluting, at least at the state level. It is the federal level that opens the dikes. It is the military that does that, and they do it for a particular reason that comes from Washington. I'm happy to say that I've read recently that there's been some funding from our congressman in Washington to study the issue a little bit more than normal, but I don't think it's enough. That should go hand in hand with solving the problem is understanding the problem first. And I think there's a lot of misinformation, and there's a necessary link in understanding it from not only the environmental level, but from the economic level as well.
Okay, I think in my last answer, demonstrated how important this issue is to me, but the bottom line is I agree with Olivia that the waters are going to be released at this point. The question is, what are we going to do about moving forward? And the answers are out there. The answers are a reservoir, cleaning the water and restoring the natural flow of the Everglades. The solution is actually there, it's just a political will to make that happen, and that's what we need to do.
I agree, and I think what has happened is that we have had rampant pro-business policies that have not been sustainable. There hasn't been enough regulations. They've given free leeway to big sugar and big agriculture at ultimately the expense of our ecotourism, which is also an income generator here in Florida. So it's a big problem, and it needs to be addressed, and we need to be looking at these solutions.
Thank you. First of all, we all know that the dike is not going to get repaired. Right now, it's made up of mud and trees and so forth. But it breaks, it destroys both coasts. So first of all, that's not going to happen overnight. So they're going to continue to let that water out. And in the future, that water will have to be let out sooner or later, even if the water level is higher. So what's being done now? Well, being done now is the fact that we would probably be, since I've been in office, 16 years ahead if a certain governor back in 2009 had not decided that he didn't want to go forward with the Everglades restoration and the reservoirs to clean that water. The water coming out has to be cleaned through natural wetlands and then go into the reservoirs. The water to the north is starting to be done the same way, and we're also allowing landowners to hold that water back before it gets into Indian River Lagoon or so.
Okay, I want to ask a follow-up question to that because you raised an issue, and I think you can all answer this in a few words. Senator Negrin passed his plan for the reservoir at the last legislature. Some people believe that it does not go far enough, that the configuration is wrong. So very quickly, do you support that plan and or do we need to go further?
No, we need to go further, and the engineers and scientists can make it the best way. I mean, it was kind of we saw this coming. President Negron saw it coming, but we need to do more. I was involved with building a 4 mile around 12 billion gallon reservoir. And I know the technical aspects that have to be taken. So we need to expand that. We need to expand the reservoirs to the south, and we need to put continued pressure on the Corps of Engineers to raise the lake.
Yes.
I agree, we need to go further, and I think with all of these environmental issues, we need to be going further.
Yeah, I agree with everybody up here. In the studies that I've read about the plan, it's inadequate and is not going to address the issue. So I think we need to go further as well.
Correct. It seems like a stopgap plan. It's meant to solve the immediate problem of what to do now because of the things that we've discussed. Pollution is a long-range issue. The dike is a long-range issue. This is a short-term fix to stop the massive outsourcing of nutrients that we're seeing that cause and are going to cause massive amounts of tourism damage. We're going to see that next year. We're going to see the coastal communities want to bail out from the state and federal government for the disaster which it is now.
See, normally I'm mad when I'm, at the beginning because everybody just gets to build off of me, but now I have nothing left to add. It's a Band-Aid, it's a short-term fix, and it definitely doesn't go far enough.
Great. So the next question, Olivia will start. It's sort of a tough one, I think. What's your single most significant personal or professional accomplishment regarding sea level rise, the environment, energy conservation, or sustainability?
That is a tough one. I mean, professional, I haven't had the opportunity to work on environmental issues a lot. Most of my issues have been on healthcare, and, but I actually have had the opportunity to work on public transportation. So that does affect environmental issues a lot, and that is something that we do need to work on desperately in Florida, because that does contribute to, of course, our emissions and pollution, and all of the factors that contribute to climate change. And Florida does have a huge carbon footprint because we have so many cars on the road, because we have not addressed the issue of public transportation here. So that is something that I am proud to have worked on or tried to push is regional transportation programs, and that's something that we're trying to address here for the disability community, but something that would be impactful for our entire community is getting cars off the road.
Jason?
Specifically, my background is in criminal justice. I was a prosecutor, now I'm an assistant attorney general, and I did work on a host of, or small pieces of legislation, I guess, that are all part of a larger piece of legislation involving criminal justice. But specific to the question, the change is now. The change is the fact that I'm jumping in the ring and wanting to run. I'm here admitting to these, as a Republican, admitting to the issues that we're talking about. That in itself, I think, is a generational change. And there's a group that's supporting me made up of 20-year-old kids who are all Republicans. They're all millennials and even lower than millennials in age that are Republican in terms of conserving their money, understanding economics because they've been forced to in the economy of today. There's a sea change of youth into the Republican Party, and they're actually pro-environment.
Okay, I would say that the one policy I can think of that I was at least tangentially involved in as an Air Force lawyer were the DoD actually, despite the fact that the mission of the Air Force is to drop bombs on targets, as they say, also can lead the way in some environmental policies. And so the civil engineering squadrons in the Air Force, when I was active duty, received guidance from big DoD to basically green up the Air Force buildings and the vehicles. And so I think, my experience with that taught me that government can lead the way in a certain way by making sure there are charging stations, buying up solar panels to bring those market costs down. So that's my experience, and I think we can do the same thing at the state level.
Tracy?
I've done a lot with environmental organizations over the years, so I'm trying to think of the biggest thing. I fought for the Clean Air Act, knocking on doors. I fought for a return to recycling post-Katrina in New Orleans. I would say the thing that was most impactful on me, however, was coordinating legal aid services after the BP oil spill in New Orleans, because I was able to see firsthand specifically the effects not just on the wildlife and on the environment, but on businesses and people, fishermen who had lost their livelihoods, the bartenders in the restaurants where the fishermen ate. I mean, it impacted up the coast so significantly that we had large amounts of people that were no longer employed. And from a criminal justice standpoint, we were seeing that impact the criminal justice system as well. So we were seeing that the food chain going up, and I think I just got my flag, but thank you. Oh, I've got your microphone again, Tony.
Ray?
Well, my personal accomplishment is and I'm not kidding, my personal accomplishment is raising my two sons in the great community of Sarasota County and having them stay in the state of Florida and to serve the public as I've tried to serve. As a legislator, as I mentioned, I worked for Agriculture and Natural Resources. We dealt with everything, but the most recent one that I was happy with for most of the time was that we passed the first Water Resources Act in the state of Florida. In doing so, however, it got diluted like so many laws do when it gets in, and particularly the best management practices for agriculture, which I'd like to see kicked up again. These are the types of things that don't ask you to do them, they give you an incentive to do them, not a bad. And some of those include fees for agriculture, for restoration, and to reduction of pollutants in our environment.
The next question is an important one, not that the others aren't. Addressing sea level rise and flooding will require action from all levels of government. But what do you think the state can and should do to play a role in leading a response to these problems?
Well, first of all, the state has to prioritize it and understand that what's going to happen. If we just look at what the locals are doing in Miami with the pumps, with the king tides they have to deal with, and then continue to push that as a priority in our legislative efforts, does that mean that we're going to have to join with the locals and try to bring the federal government in for some of these needs? Absolutely. Also be an issue, and if we can finally figure out how to stop that saltwater intrusion, and there are some solutions that are being put forth, that's going to help. But it always comes down to the dollar. So it has to be prioritized by the state. We have to realize the damage, the prevention thing we mentioned before, those dollars will be well spent.
I believe that coordination among all levels of government is absolutely crucial to addressing this. And of course, the state has a very big role to play in that. We need federal monies as well, but each municipality, each smaller district is facing different problems based on how they've built, based on whether or not they're on the Gulf side or on the other side of Florida. And so I believe that it is the state's responsibility to actually kind of play the middle role in between the federal government and the municipalities to make sure that we have systems and organizations in place to actually address those specific problems in each community.
Yeah, I think one of the main things that can be done at the state level is living up to the promise that of Amendment 1, the legislature living up to its obligations under Amendment 1, which required the legislature to allocate a certain amount of the dock stamp fees to buy up conservation lands. A state judge in Tallahassee just ruled against the legislature, saying they're not living up to what the voters wanted. So we know that Floridians overwhelmingly want to support environmental causes, but we need to keep the pressure on the legislature and individual legislators to live up to those promises.
I agree with basically all of those points, and to add to that, Florida has one of the largest coastlines. We are the ones at the largest risk. Sometimes we are a small community, in a church talking about issues in the evening. Sometimes we are a county. Sometimes we're a state. Sometimes we're the United States. And this is one particular problem where it needs coordination at all those levels and even beyond. You can imagine if we pass laws that restrict various outputs, it hurts us economically to other countries who don't have those same restrictions. So the coordination needs to go all the way up the food chain, even up to international law and international treaties.
Goes back to Tony now. Didn't you just answer?
No.
No, it's okay. All right.
Tony did.
That's all right.
It's okay. Definitely it's going to take coordination at all levels. People have been saying, using, instead of flood insurance, to have people build over and over and over again, using those funds and coordinating that with FEMA funds and other grants, as I mentioned earlier, for buyback programs, so people don't keep building over and over again when they're just going to have their homes destroyed. Using those lands as possible ecotourism lands, using the Amendment 1 funds in smart manner, investing in our infrastructure, coordinating with local governments, of course, and just making sure that we're keeping our people safe. We don't want people out on barrier islands where they're going to get washed out to sea and having their homes destroyed all the time. And just making sure that we're using those funds properly and coordinating at all levels of government.
So we're getting close to the end of this, so I'm just saying that so you can all practice your brevity skills if that's possible. And I will reintroduce everybody at the end of this so you can remember who these people are if you don't know them. This question is simple. In what way is sea level rise related to the human impact on the environment?
I would say extensively. We keep pumping pollutants into the air, we cause a hole in the ozone layer, and it's a feedback loop. As ice melts, temperatures rise, it causes more ice to melt, which, dumps into the oceans, and it keeps going. And we've already deciphered that we are going to reach the point that was determined to be the critical point. It's been determined that we are going to do that. There's no turning back from that. The goal is to not go beyond that, to kind of stop it before it's worse than that point. So we're not talking about wiping ourselves out as a species. So we want to mitigate the effects that we've already caused. So we definitely want to invest in clean energy and these types of things to mitigate the damage that we've already done. But we are definitely responsible for what we've done.
Just to piggyback off of what Olivia was talking about, I mean, we're the Sunshine State. We should be leading the country in alternative fuels, specifically solar energy, for all of those reasons. In addition to the things that she described, I mean, there's a security issue, there's a famine issue when the temperatures change, the climate changes, the latitudes change, things that used to grow well at a particular latitude no longer do. You're going to see shortages of food. We're seeing this in other countries already. We're seeing wars that are started over things of this nature. So it poses a big threat. And you can imagine in places on the coastline of India where there literally are hundreds of millions of people that live on the coast. Well, what if they have to migrate in a quick fashion and they don't have any money? I mean, you're going to see famines and riots. It's a massive, massive humanitarian problem that's going to be slow, as glacially to use a pun, but like a melting glacier.
So I'll try to be brief. I want to talk a little bit about quality of life and a very specific case. I have a cousin who's a charter fisherman. His name is Ryan. He's never voted for a Republican or for a Democrat in his life. He's going to vote for me, and I think that's because I'm his cousin. But I have seen increasingly over this summer, his business has declined, and the issue of climate change and the issue of sea level rise has risen, no pun intended on that one, in his hierarchy of issues that are important to him. And we're only going to see that as the second order effects come in this. So I hope it doesn't take too much to have a culture change in that area, but we're already seeing the effects for people who traditionally don't support environmental issues, who are seeing that have an effect on their daily lives. So that's the effect it has.
Yes, and I think we are actually starting to see that culture change. The environment is a bipartisan issue most of the time. I mean, 75% of Florida voters voted for Amendment 1. We all want to support the environment, and I absolutely believe that sea level rise is related to human involvement. But that actually makes me feel hopeful, because if we caused it, we can stop it, and we can find solutions for it.
Can you repeat the question? I got a little more information there than I thought I would.
Okay, in what ways is sea level rise related to human activity?
Well, first of all, I guess it is. There's no doubt about that whether you have the normal cyclical changes that we've heard about from scientists, we have to understand that there are billions of people on this earth, and unlike the United States, who is actually moving forward quicker with carbon emissions, and we are moving closer to alternative sources, we have a number of billions of people that are not following our lead, specifically in China and India and those countries. In Europe, we can learn by some of their examples on alternative energy to cut down those emissions. But the more people, the more activity, building on the coast, all of those things are interrelated, so it does have an impact.
Okay, you all did great. We have, I think, time for one more question.
Can you take an audience question?
Sure, if you've got, but you're supposed to do cards.
I did turn one in, but I think it was rejected.
It was rejected. Well, I am not in control of that, so. But let's give them one more chance to answer a question. I want to introduce them again before they start or answer so that you can all remember who they are. This is Ray Pilon. He's running for State House 72. Tracy Pratt, State House 71. Tony Mowry, State House 74. Jason Miller, State House 72. And Olivia Babis, Senate seat 23. So those are our guests here. And this will be the final question. Under what conditions do you think it's appropriate to use state or to use tax dollars to fund sea level rise resiliency activities? And what efforts, if any, would you champion at the state legislative level to address sea level rise and flooding resiliency efforts?
Great question.
Yes.
We kind of touched on it before, that I think it needs to be prioritized. You know, we balance our budget. We have an $89 billion budget. State's been in better shape than it's ever been. It's how we spend that money. So this is one area that we need to spend that money, but we need to do it in cooperation with the locals and with the federal government, as we've talked about before. There's no doubt that this is much more serious than a lot of people are giving attention to. So I will shout from the mountaintops, particularly for our area here, which is a coastal area, that we need to move forward, the state prioritizing that. And yes, those tax dollars, mainly sales tax dollars that we all spend at the grocery store and every place, are meant to provide services and protect the public. This is a good way to start.
I absolutely think we should be spending more resources on this. As we watched from the video before, and as we know, if we don't spend the money now, we're spending more money down the road. And having lived in New Orleans both, pre and post Katrina, I can tell you that I would have rather put some more money in my taxes than watch my flood insurance 10 times higher than it was before Katrina, and watching people who could no longer afford to live in homes because their insurance rates had gone up. So this money is going to be spent one way or another, and I'd rather see it done as preventive measures now so that we can protect our communities.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that we need to spend the money that's necessary on the front end, just like I believe David said, as a corollary to medical spending. You want to spend on preventative measures rather than fixing a problem afterwards. But the drum I want to beat a little bit on that is that we also have to put into place and spend the money to fix the underlying issue, which is climate change. So yes, we have to spend money on infrastructure, but we also have to be cognizant that that can't be a Band-Aid and then, pretend like we did something and then the underlying problem just gets bigger and we have to address this issue over and over again. So I would say yes, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that there's an underlying issue that needs to be addressed as well.
My answer is very similar. It has to do with water quality. Basically, everything in Florida runs on the quality of water. Quality of water in Lake Okeechobee and spills have worsened. The pollution in Lake Okeechobee has worsened. The water quality that's running off the streams and rivers on all the coast, it has decreased in its quality. So one thing that we can do at the state level relatively immediately is have reasonable regulation on maintaining water quality, specifically protecting things that are in the state like the aquifer.
Oh my God, I just heard a Republican say regulation.
Reasonable regulation.
I agree with a lot of what's being said. We want preventative measures. We're on a peninsula. We're surrounded by water. This is going to take a good percentage of our budget to address, but it needs to be done at all levels of government. Our municipalities are going to have to invest in infrastructure as well as our state and our federal government. But we don't want to be kicking the can down the road. We want to make sure we're taking preventative measures. We want to make sure we're mitigating the effects. But we want to make sure that we're also preventing future changes as well. Not like we did with Lake Okeechobee, where we identified a problem 50 years ago, but we're still dealing with it now on what we should have done 50 years ago, and we're still talking about it. So we make sure we address these issues now that we've identified them. We know what the problem is. Let's stop talking about it and actually act on it. So those are the things that we kind of need to start doing now.
That's all the time we have for this group of people. Thank you all very much. You were great. Olivia, Jason, Tony,